Scott Sullivan has a Thomistic Cosmological argument that is apparently supported and espoused by Tim H of Philapologia. Does his argument stand up to scrutiny? The first premise says dependent beings exist. The second premise says either dependent beings exist because of an infinite series of other dependent beings or because of an independent being. Premise 3 says not because of infinite series of other dependent beings. And the conclusion, or premise 4, says, therefore, because of an independent being, which theists call God. The argument fails at premise 2, because premise 2 commits the fallacy of an argument from ignorance and a false dichotomy. The premise commits an argument from ignorance because Mr. Sullivan is almost certainly not aware of the objectivist solution to infinite regress of dependent beings. The objectivist solution that halts infinite regress is existence as a conceptual whole. This then leads to the fact that the second premise is a false dichotomy because it offers only two options, which is either an infinite series of other dependent beings or an independent being. The third option is the totality of existence. Mr. Sullivan's argument fails to prove God unless he or Tim H can show how the objectivist foundation of existence as a conceptual whole is itself dependent on something outside of it. The argument also fails because premise 2 commits what has been identified by Dr. William Craig and allegedly by Arthur Schopenhauer as the taxicab fallacy. Premise 2 commits the taxicab fallacy because the problem of dependent beings is simply dismissed like a hack once the theist arrives at his desired destination and conclusion of God. Essentially what you have is the positing of a being, something with a distinct and separate existence from something else. A being is an entity. All the theist is doing is positing entity A, and that is dependent, then positing entity B, and that is dependent, and positing entity C, and that is dependent, and doing this on and on until he says, well, we can't posit an infinite series of entities, otherwise we can never explain the rest of the entities. So we'll just stop with this entity, and instead of saying it is dependent, we will say it's independent and call it God. The positing of dependent beings / entities and then having one more that you arbitrarily call independent and God simply to solve the infinite regress does not solve the problem of dependency. It only dismisses it once you arrive at your desired conclusion of needing one of these beings / entities to be an independent one. The positing of a being / entity that happens to be independent does not solve the infinite regress problem because that which has a distinct existence from something else is not sufficient to be an irreducible primary, as it still depends on a prior truth. Only that which does not depend on anything outside of it for its existence and depends on no prior truths can be a true uncaused cause. And the only thing that fits the bill is the totality of existence, taken as a whole and conceptualized, otherwise known as existence as a conceptual whole, or existence for short, existence being a collective noun.